Well, good morning and welcome to this conservation cropping seminar this morning. I'm your host, Illinois Extension Farm broadcaster Todd Gleason. Thank you so very much for being with us over the next hour, a couple of hours, in fact. I hope you will take some time and write out some questions in the chat box and enjoy the time learning a little bit about some conservation cropping practices that you might deploy on your farms. Coming up, we'll have a very good conversation. Our sponsors for the day include the Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation District, along with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, USDA, NRCS, the Association of Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts, the American Farmland Trust, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, Pro Harvest Seeds, Illinois Extension, and Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. Our thanks go to them. Dennis Bowman, if you could bring us the Peterson brothers. They have a very nice introduction video that we'd like to play for you at this time.
Hey everyone, I'm Greg.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Kendall.
Welcome to the Cover Cropping Systems Seminar. We hope you guys are excited for what you're about to learn and go through. We're going to give a little introduction to who we are and some of the things that we've done and why we're passionate about soil health and cover crops. We're three brothers that farm together in central Kansas, and we also make YouTube videos and different online content to promote agriculture, not only from an entertainment side of things, but also from an educational side of things. We got started back in 2012 with our first video, I'm Farming and I Grow It. And that video was a parody of a popular song that we took and changed the lyrics to and posted. And that video got 5 million views in a week. And we've since done 20 music videos about farming that we now have a combined view count on Facebook and YouTube of about 150 million views. If you'd have told us 8 years ago that that was even possible, we wouldn't have believed you. But we're really thankful for the exposure that those videos have brought farming and agriculture, and hopefully people have learned some from our videos as well.
We farm together as the 5th generation of our family farm, and it's a pretty typical Kansas farm. We grow cattle and wheat, corn, soybeans, grain sorghum or milo, and yes, lots of forages and cover crops. And so we're always looking to learn more about farming as well as show it to other people.
So we all three actually graduated from Kansas State University. Greg majored in Ag Communications, Nathan majored in Ag Technology Management, and I majored in Ag Econ. So we all three are kind of trying to take over different parts of the operation. There's a lot more people involved now than there was in 2012 when we first got started doing the videos. We actually were all three still in school then. So a lot of things have changed as Greg got married to his wife, Bricanna. Nathan got married to his wife, Riley, and I'm married to my wife, Kaylin. And our sister, who's currently in college, she helps out seasonally on the farm as well as our mom. And then our dad, and that rounds out the workforce here on Peterson Farm. And so we've learned a lot since 2012. Our farm has changed a lot, we hope in good ways. And with that, we've hopefully improved the soil and our livestock management, and pretty much every part of the farm we try to improve, and we have goals to hit those each year.
And Kendall just had a baby this past year, and then Nathan and Riley are expecting, and Bricanna and I are expecting. So lots of exciting changes coming to our family and our farm. And so just real quick, we wanted to talk a little bit about why we implement cover crops on our farm and why soil health is important to us. We have been a no-till farming operation since about the year 2000 is when we kind of got started with that. And our dad has always really believed in that system. And we farm in the hills of Kansas, or at least we think they're hills. And we think as far as the hills go, no-till is a great system, and then cover crops is kind of brings another layer of that to our operation. And so after making YouTube videos and having people ask questions about those, I think we all three have become a little more well-versed in kind of what all cover cropping and no-till and soil health entails. And we're going to perform a video at the end of our talk here that we actually made kind of dedicated to soil health And so that explains a lot of my passion about soil health, having written those lyrics. But I think it's really important to be good stewards of the land and to keep soil from blowing or running off the field, and then it improves your bottom line as well.
Yeah, I actually minored in agronomy while I was at Kansas State, and so that was kind of where I first heard of cover crops and things like that, and it made me really excited because we have the cattle side and cropping side, and we do struggle with both erosion when we have too much rain and wind erosion when it's too dry, and then we are always having either too much rain or not enough. And if you do cover cropping right, it can be a challenge. Here we're usually short on rain rather than too much, but it can go either way. But it's a fun challenge to try to use cover crops to help balance out your moisture and save the water when you get too much of it, and conserve it for when it's dry. So that's what I like about them.
And there's a lot of different variables with our crop rotation here in Kansas, especially when we integrate both the cow-calf herd and grazing stocker cattle. And so in between, whether we're grazing crop residues or cover crops, there's a lot of value in getting livestock out on the land, and we can see that in our the health of our soils. And we do testing before and after just to see organic matter, if we can raise that a full percent, and just getting the manure spread out on the field, there's benefit to that too. And so everything kind of works together in our operation, and then hopefully it makes the beef side more profitable and the cropping side more profitable.
Yeah, so we hope you guys have a great seminar, and we hope that this has been a good welcome message for you guys. We love talking about this kind of stuff, and we might even follow along with the seminar. But we're going to close our opening here with a parody song that we wrote and filmed. It's called Residue, and it's a parody of Shape of You by Ed Sheeran. And so I hope you guys enjoy this. We're going to try to perform it down here with the phone speaker set up, and so I hope you guys can hear all right, and hope you enjoy. The city isn't the best place for me to be, and so the field is where I go. Me and my family on the farm, planting crops, working fast, and then we plant slow. And some of the farmers work the soil till it's bare, but trust me, give this a chance. Now take them right out to our farm that we're surveying right before we start to plant. Now I'm singing like, soil, I know you need good health. That's why I take the soil test to the lab. Come on now, what do you need? S-C-A-N-G.
Say soil, got to protect you from all the rain, wind, and compaction too. That is why I love these roots. That is why I love these roots.
I'm in love with the residue that I pull my planter through. Although tilling is kind of fun too, I'm in love with the cover. Last night I was in the field, planting clover and radishes too. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the cover, oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why. I'm in love with the cover, oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why. I'm in love with the cover, oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why. I'm in love with the cover, every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the residue. One weekend we let the story begin. It sprouted and there's a big rain. Residues, it keeps the soil from shifting off the field like a runaway train. It's hot for hours and hours, but we don't even have to scour, cause our moisture is doing okay. When harvest comes from accident, it's far less taxing than working up the soil all day. Now I'm singing like,
soil, I know you need good health. That's why I keep the soil structure intact. Come on now, what do you need? Aggregates and microbe activity.
Say soil, got to protect you from all the rain, wind, and compaction too. That is why I love these roots. That is why I love these roots.
I'm in love with the residue that I pull my cedar through. Although tilling is kind of fun too, I'm in love with the cover. Last night I was in the field, planting clover and radishes too. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the cover, oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why. I'm in love with the cover, oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why. I'm in love with the cover. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with the cover. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the residue. Enjoy the conference, everyone.
Our thanks go to the Peterson brothers for that really great little introductory video. Ivan is the Illinois State Conservationist with NRCS. Ivan, good morning to you. Thank you so much for being with us today. We do appreciate that.
You know, that's a tough act to follow there, but I really do appreciate the opportunity to welcome everyone to this virtual Illinois Conservation Cropping Seminar. I'm glad to be here, and this is the second of 3 sessions that we have planned for 2021. The first one was just last week, and there were more than 300 people in attendance, so that's a good thing. You may have plugged into some of these events before. If you've attended these partnership sessions in person, of course, you know that our goal is to offer the farmers new information, new research, innovative ideas to help add more conservation solutions to your operations. So while I do hope we have some repeat customers registered for today's session, I also hope that we have some new farmers, researchers, students, agribusiness professionals at the table as well. So if this is your first seminar, I'd like to offer you an extra big welcome and a thank you. And for this morning's session, who you'll be hearing from, again, we just heard from the Peterson Farm Brothers talk about what they've going on. And again, a wonderful rendition there. I just like the enthusiasm. We have a special guest today, Ray Archuleta. Ray is what I would call a soil health enthusiast. And I've had the opportunity to work with Ray when he was with NRCS. And I'll tell you, if he can't get you fired up about the biology of living soil, I'm not sure anyone can. And then we also have 2 more outstanding Illinois farmers, Ted Krauskopf and Monte Bottens, and they're going to share their stories and what they've done and learned and find out what things might be able to work on your operation. I do want to thank this morning again our partners, Todd, that you mentioned that helped pull together the speakers and the platform to deliver it to you. And of course, the speakers who are going to offer their time and their ideas, and everyone who signed up today and dedicated their time to be a part of this. Thanks for sitting in, for listening in, and for your desire to learn from others. You probably heard people, maybe even me, talk about how great our Illinois soils are, how they developed, how naturally productive they can be, and how lucky we are to have them. And that's all true. But I'm also always looking up the road towards the future, focused on the future condition of our soils, our water, all of our natural resources. Thinking about that next generation and what they're going to have to do to grow food and fiber to feed our nation. And it's in our hands. It's in your hands. It's in all of our hands. But it does make me happy to know that conservation remains a priority for Illinois farmers. The different ideas, practices, management techniques, the federal programs and conservation planning assistance that you're going to hear about today are available to everyone. And I do want to assure you that my NRCS field office staff and local teams are just a phone call or an email away. They're ready to help make it happen on your farm. So again, thanks to you for logging in today. I hope you enjoy the speakers. Ask questions, take it all in, because that's what I plan to do. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Todd. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Ivan. Ivan Dozier, of course, is the state conservationist here in Illinois. And again, I want you to ask questions too. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. We'll get to them after we hear from some of the speakers. Ray Archuleta is here. He's our first speaker, in fact, and he's a conservationist, a water quality specialist, and a conservation agronomist. He was with NRCS. Ray received his AS degree in livestock science from Northern New Mexico College and a BS in agricultural biology, plus 30 hours of graduate work in soil-related courses from New Mexico State. He served in the Peace Corps for 2 years in Guatemala as a livestock specialist, and after his retirement in 2017 from NRCS, Ray founded the Understanding Ag LLC and Soil Health Academy to teach biomimicry strategies and agroecology principles for improving soil function on a national scale. Ray also owns and operates a 150-acre farm near Seymour, Missouri. Ray, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you being here and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Ivan, and good morning. Sorry if that my voice sounds a little rough. I've just been battling COVID for the last week or so, but we're doing well. Everybody in the family got it, but I'm excited to be here. And I love that the Peterson brothers, I'm a big fan of theirs. I got to admit, I was kind of dancing in my room, so I was pretty excited about it. Thank you so much for that musical. I want to start off with the concept of biomimicry. What does that mean? It's a framework of looking at the soil. It's a framework of asking nature, how do we set up our cropping systems, our agriculture, and how we approach some of our most sophisticated problems we have in humanity and mimic the natural system, because the natural system probably has the answer. So the thing I'm going to talk about here is the first one I'm going to go to here is I'm going to talk about 3 basic concepts. And these are the concepts that I've noticed that farmers have struggled with. I also had a struggle with, and it made me realize it's the way I had gone to college and what I have learned and what we have learned from generation to generation to generation. The first one is the soil is alive. This is incredibly critical. If people do not understand, if farmers do not understand that the soil is alive, just as alive as you are, you will not change how you do things in the operation. Number 2 is understand relationship. Relationship, what do I mean by relationship? Connectedness, ecology, everything is connected. Everything is one. It is very, very important to understand. In farming and ranching, you need to understand that because you deal with a system that is interconnected. And then the last one is understand the goal. The goal is mimic nature, mimic life. If we all could have come to agreement on one thing, that the goal on our operation is to emulate nature, emulate life. In fact, we should all wear a t-shirt. I'm a biomimicker. I mimic life. That's what ranchers and farmers do. That's what our operations should reflect. Now, the biggest issue I've noticed as I've spent years and years and years training, I've been in every state 3 or 4 or 5 times. One of the biggest difficulty on the farm and operation, on the farm or ranch, is the mindset. It is the years and years of information we picked, not only from our professors, from our schools, from our from our grandparents, our uncles, from the local community. It's the mindset. It is the most difficult thing to change on the operation. Actually, the soil is easy to fix, but this is the most difficult thing to fix. And so one of the most difficult things to fix is the mindset. The toughest, most indurated surface is between the ears. I'll tell farmers, it's between the ears is the biggest problem. What happened to me is I had an epiphany, and an epiphany is kind of like something that breaks up that paradigm, that starts to make you search outside yourself. For me, it happened back in 2001, working in Idaho. I noticed that farmers and ranchers were going broke. We were spending billions and billions of dollars, and the water was not getting clean, and farmers were still going broke, and their sons were not coming into the operation. I said, what is wrong? That was my epiphany. That was my paradigm shift. And all of us will go through that. those who are some of the best farmers in soil health, all of them went through a paradigm shift, every one of them. Again, out of the 3 pillars of learning, mindset is most critical. One of the things I noticed about operators, farmers who have a different mindset, if you have the right mindset, you will pick up the skills and then you will learn how to use the tools correctly. Mindset is everything. It is everything. If you do not have the mindset to willing to learn, never to give up, and that you understand that freedom takes hard work, you will not pick up the skill set and you will not use the tools correctly. Very critical to understand. Okay, one of the things I've also understood is humans are really good at creating distinction, but they're not really good understanding relationship. Let me give you an example. When I tell people about cover crops or no-till, people say, well, Ray, you don't understand, it's too cold. And then they also tell me, well, Ray, you don't understand, it's too dry. And I also hear, well, Ray, it's too wet. And I tell them, well, guess what? In every one of those regions, no-till is happening and they're using cover crops. They're using it in Canada. They're using it in Afghanistan. They're using it in Louisiana. What do all those 3 ecoregions have in common? Life. They have a water cycle. They have diversity. It's still part of the planet Earth. It's not Mars. That is what's common. Life exists in all those ecoregions and it runs by life. So it's very critical to understand that. One of the most difficult things for farmers to understand, including myself, and it was by a Russian professor, I'll never forget, he says one of the most strongest geological force on the planet is life itself. Growing up in the Rockies in New Mexico, it was not uncommon to see this a tree growing out of that rock. And I tell farmers, now that is a compaction issue. How in the world does that tree survive that compaction issue? What it does is that tree releases CO2, creates these gentle carbonic acids. It also makes association with fungi and bacteria that break rock down. Microorganisms can break rock down. So if a living plant is one of the most powerful things that you can do on your operation, wouldn't it not make sense that cover crops would be that tool? It is that tool that changes and feeds the soil ecosystem. Again, the power of life. To give you an example, this is Australia. There's a calcium gypsum seabed. How would you like to farm like that, farmers in Illinois? You know, because Illinois, Indiana, the I-states, yes, you have some of the best soils in the world. But how about other farms? How do they make it? Look at that. How in the world did it get dark on the top of that surface? How did it get dark? Life. Microbial life and plant life knows how to change geology. It is critical to understand this is what we're dealing with. This is a water bear found in soil columns. This is what we deal with, life. Until we see our soils like that, we're not going to farm the way that we should. We will not be cautious the way we use our chemicals, our fertilizers, our tillage. It is incredibly important how we view the soil. Now, relationship and connectedness. It is amazing to me how many of us lost this and don't understand the power of connectedness. Every one of us is connected. Ecology is connected. Why should we know that? Because if we don't understand connectedness, we're not going to understand the implications of our using our tools incorrectly and how it can be very harmful. Let me show you an example. If you see the picture here on the left, that producer has no relationship with the soil, does not understand that the soil's alive. That is a growing medium. The picture on the right, the farmer understands relationship. He's protecting and feeding the soil and planting into a living cover. This is the science that I knew on the left. This is what I grew up, a science of no relationship. Now we have changed that. We are now all over the country basing our science on relationship, the science of ecology. Also, again, the way we raise our animals. When I went to college, this is the way I was taught. We want to be efficient. We want to treat nature like a machine. It's all about efficiency, number of animals, weight, yield, yield, yield. That's what we were teaching. Now we are teaching completely mimic the natural system, letting the pigs express themselves, express their pigness, allowing them to be part of the natural system, which ends up being better for our health and for the animal. Same thing with our livestock. People are demanding this. People are demanding food that comes from the picture you see on the right. That is Gabe Brown's ranch, grazing multi-species mixes. And then here on the left, people are giving a lot of blowback because they do not want their animals raised in that kind of environment. This is why you see more people going into veggie burgers, Impossible Burgers, or whatever, because of what you see in the left. But things are changing. Now, biomimicry. There's an institute called the Institute of Biomimicry. I wish I would have gone to school. Some of our best technology came from mimicking life. The cockleburr, that's how we learned how to make Velcro. Some of the most sophisticated jets, mimicking birds. We are now doing the same for our cropping systems. I want my cover crop mixes to look like the prairie and like the forest. This is what you're seeing. I want my cover crops to emulate that structure, that beauty, that resilience, that biodiversity. In fact, that's how we came up with the principles of soil health, the 6 principles of soil health. The one we added just recently is the one context. Please keep in mind, living roots, armor in the soil, diversity, reduced disturbance, animal integration. That's what nature does. She does that all the time. The one that we added recently is context. Context is for us, because without context, the other principles don't mean anything, because it's us who impacts the environment. So when I work with a producer, I need to understand their ecological context, their financial context, their community context. People don't realize the social and cultural pressure locally is brutal. And also the spiritual context. I deal with people from Hawaii. They look at the land very spiritually. The Amish, the Mennonites, many people have a spiritual connection to the land. So context is absolutely critical. So we added that because sometimes we think we're talking to machines, that we're going to promote knowledge, technical knowledge, without understanding their context, which is wrong. So again, biomimicry, we want our crops to look like the forest. And notice the forest has a skin. You have leaves. So when we roll the cover crops, we kill it and terminate it, and we create this instant skin. That skin protects the soil and feeds microbes. We are doing biomimicry. Again, look at the way those cover crop mixes. This is what we're shooting for so that we can bring diversity, life, capture sun, build aggregation. This is what we're heading for. This is a machine that was built by farmers. It's not just a sprayer, but it drops cover crop seed on standing corn so that when you harvest your corn, the beautiful mix comes and pops right out. This is what we want. We don't want to see any bare soil. The ancient people used to call the plant the mouth of the soil. That's how the soil eats, through the living plant, captures solar energy and converts it into chemical energy. You cannot do that without a living plant. We're doing this on cotton. We're doing this on tobacco, tomatoes, corn, soybean. This is spreading all over the country. And right here, this is Rick Clark in Indiana. He's rolling covers down. What a beautiful scene. Rolling the cover crops and planting right into it. Rick is organic no-till. We'll talk about him later on the video. This is what we're shooting for on a national scale. And this is growing on acres. Now, here's his organic no-till soybeans. No chemicals used at all. But unfortunately, this is a majority of how California is cover crop. This is a cover crop in California. Gabe Brown and myself were out there driving. We saw this one little plant and there was 4 bees on it. That's the California cover crop. Unfortunately, a majority of our country still looks like this. Very sad. Now, here's a critical thing to understand. The plant and soil are one. They are not separate units. If you take the plant out, you have no microbes. If you take the microbes out, you take the plants out, you have geology. Right now, our soils are starving for liquid sun, carbon. We do not have enough living plants during the whole year to feed the microbes. This is what's happening. We are not capturing enough solar energy. That is a video clip of roots leaking hundreds of liquid compounds of root exudates. This is what we want to feed the microbes with, folks. So the moment we put a living plant, this is what happens. These bacteria start to grow by the billions, and they become part of the organic matter. They're the ones that bring the phosphorus, the zinc, and they take the mineral out of the rock. Then with fungi, they're the ones that can degrade PCBs, pesticides. They can also make boron and manganese and all these elements. They do that, but you cannot do that without a living plant. So it's very critical to understand that. So here again, I tell producers, look at the picture here on the right. This is the nutrient cycle. What you see here is mesofauna breaking down the residue, incorporating it, making it aggregation with living plants and the living biology that they do this. So the more we disc this, the more we spray it, the more we use chemicals on it, the more we impact nutrient cycling. Very important to understand. It's these organisms right here that are critical for life on the planet. Without them, we could not have nutrient-dense food. We could not have climate. Without plants, we cannot have a climate. Without plants and soil, there is no climate. They're all connected. Again, here is a beautiful picture of aggregation created by roots. So this is what plants do. They're changing and modifying their habitat and creating this little cottage cheese. Look how plants can modify the soil. Here is no-till soil in Tennessee. Look how quickly, look how it changed from, this was 30, 40-year no-till in Tennessee. No covers. Look what happened after 3 years of covers. It went from here to here. 279% change in respiration, a 39% change in cycling. In other words, those soils are cycling so quick, if you fell and tripped, the microbes would consume you. 50% increase in soil health score. Just only 3 years of covers. That's all that was different. So in reality, what we're dealing with is this incredible subaquatic ecosystem. The most complex ecosystem on the planet is the soil itself. This model shows you what the soil really is. It is a fusion of sands and silts and clays that are aggregated together by living roots and microbes. Microbes and plants do that. This is what we're dealing with, an elegant, beautiful system that filtrates water. These soils change daily. So it is incredible to understand what we're dealing with. The thing that impacts us, the thing that impacts our soils, and I use this statement called death by tools. A majority of our operations are destroying our soils by our tools, by the way we hay, by the way we use too much fertilizer, the way we use our pesticides, our herbicides. Not one time did I say not to use these tools. It's how we're using these tools. Let me explain. There's a difference between acute stress and chronic stress. Now, if occasionally you go eat fast food, an acute stress to your body can handle it. But if you chronically eat poor food, not too much sugar, don't exercise, drink too much alcohol or whatever, that's chronic stress. What'll happen eventually through stress, too much tillage, too much fungicide, you take that organism out, affect that organism, and then the whole system collapses. Then you have to write another check for more inputs. Our goal is to keep that beautiful web intact and functioning. Let me show you a beautiful video by Michael Thompson showing the difference of a no-till and cover crop and grazing system. Look how alive that is. No-till, cover crops, and grazing. This is what we want. The more that we do this together, the more nutrient availability. The healthier our soils, the healthier the human. Okay, now let me show you a no-till system with high chemicals. Notice, you don't see much life in there, do you? See the difference? It does matter how you use your tools. So one of the things I tell people, it's the frequency of your disturbance, your intensity of your disturbance, your scale of your disturbance is critical. And so is the timing of your disturbance. It is very, very important how you do your disturbances. So keep that in mind. We have to be very careful how we manage our stresses. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about soil test. Again, from the concepts of biomimicry, we now have a soil test that uses the same concepts of biomimicry. Finally, a scientist who is brilliant came and said, hey, why don't we use green chemistry and mimic nature and design our soil test accordingly. I said, wow, what a novel idea. That's the Dr. Rick Haney test. And I'll never forget this by Dr. Buzz Clute. He says, all soil tests are wrong. Some are useful. We got that from many of you heard of models. All models are wrong. Some are useful. So what does this mean? You will never find one soil test ever that will tell you the totality and the functionality of any soil. It will not happen. We have to use various tests. When you go to the doctor has to do a blood sample, urine, fecal, CAT scan. You are complex. Same thing, the soil is complex. You have to use various samples. First thing to keep in mind, when the old soil tests were done, we did not realize in the last several hundreds of years, we have destroyed our soils. Before, 400 or 500 years ago, our soils used to look like this: prairie, forest, beautiful soils. So by the time they decided to do their first soil test, the soils were already like this. They were already diminished. We didn't understand that context. And so then when we did our calibration, we already did our calibration on very destroyed soils. So a lot of our soil tests were not calibrated correctly. And the soil tests were based on the wrong premise. So what I learned in school was this diffusion mass flow interception model. I learned in college what we called the mineral theory. And the way that worked was, it would rain and water would come in, and then it would diffuse the minerals and it would mass flow, and the plant would take it up. It does not work that way. In fact, Dr. Albrecht also knew that. He said, no, it was roots release these gentle acids, but now we know it's the biology that makes all those minerals available. So it's incredibly important because we based all of our nutrient management on the mineral theory. We have massive problems in the Gulf. We are losing huge amounts of nitrogen, and farmers are over applying nitrogen, phosphorus, and we have decoupled the carbon and the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle. Because of this model, we have ground that's 4 to 8 months bare out of the whole year. This is because of this misconception has destroyed our soils. A lot of producers still think that their soils need this for them to grow something. This is not the nutrient cycle, ladies and gentlemen. This is a salt. Good, healthy soils provide their own nutrients. This is a YouTube video that I recommend. It's called There's Magic at the Border by Dr. Brad Joran. Here he's showing that a 2-year fertilizer costs for based on 180 bushel corn and 60 bushel soybean. Values are 1,000 per 1,000 acres. He was showing how in every state, why is it there was such in stark differences in costs for fertility. If you look at Illinois and Missouri or any state, and he says, is there magic at the border? What's going on? Why is there such a huge discrepancy? So again, it was our type of our soil test, and the premise and the designs of our soil test, they were not based on the right premise. So I'm going to show you that new soil test based on biomimicry is a lot better soil test. Okay. But before I do that, I'm going to explain. I think this is incredibly important for people to understand, because one of the biggest things people say, well, Ray, aren't you guys in regenerative ag mining the soil? Well, let me show you this quick video to show you where a majority of our nutrients come from.
You look down at the little seedling sticking up out of the dirt. It's hard to imagine that one day this small tuft of green might grow to be a tree that towers over you. But where will this tree get all the materials it needs to grow? From the soil? From the water? What about from the air? Like humans, plants are made of mostly water. But when you take away the water, where does the rest of the plant's mass come from? If you remove the water from our bodies, you would find that carbon makes up most of the rest of our mass, or weight. The same is true for plants. Humans and animals get carbon from the food they eat, which is often plants. So where do you think the plants get carbon? They get it from the air. The air around you seems empty, but it's not. Air is made of tiny bits called molecules. When you look closer at the molecules in our air, you'll find that it's mostly nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Plants actually absorb this carbon dioxide from the air through small openings in their leaves or other tissues. These openings are called stomata. Once inside a plant, the carbon dioxide is broken down, and some of the carbon ends up in the chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are special cell parts that hold chlorophyll, the molecules that make most plants green. Chloroplasts are also where photosynthesis takes place, which is how plants convert sunlight energy into food they can use. Carbon, water, and energy are used in this process to make glucose, which is a type of sugar. Glucose molecules can then combine to form long chains called cellulose, which are used to build plant structures like cell walls. So the carbon from the air, along with water and energy from the sun, help to make these structures. As cells grow, they divide and make new cells. These new cells are how plants get bigger. The most amazing part of this process is changing air into plant material. This sort of magic trick transforms something which seems weightless and empty into material that has weight and that you can see. From a tiny seedling to a tall tree making seeds of its own, plants grow by pulling carbon out of the air. So in the end, plants really are made out of thin air.
I'm going to have to embarrass myself. I did not understand that. In fact, I did not understand that 95% of that corn crop you see out there, that soybean crop, is actually made out of thin air. It comes from hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon. My wife and I got to go to California, and that redwood trees, you see that tree, that thing weighs 4.2 million pounds. Folks, that is 3.99 million pounds of air. A majority of that tree came from the air, not from the soil. Very little comes from the soil. I think that's incredibly important to understand, because a lot of times we hear a lot of critique about where are you going to get the fertilizer? Where are you going to get the phosphorus? Very little comes from the soil, ladies and gentlemen. It's very critical to understand. A majority of our crops are literally from thin air. So it's critical to understand that. Now, to Rick Haney's test. Rick is from ARS USDA. I got to meet Rick in 2011, and I had been looking for a soil test because I knew that we were way off in our nitrogen recommendations. And Rick created a test that's based on green chemistry. And again, biomimicry. What does that mean? What he did is he created a soil test that is based on this. If you see this on the right, that is a picture of the root exudase. Rick used gentle acids, acylic, malic, and citric acids. And he says, well, if the plant gives off these gentle acids, why don't we use that as the extract instead of the very caustic acids that the old soil test uses? What you see, sulfuric acid. On the left, you'll see that's the old soil test. It would force the cations off the exchange site. But Rick says, well, that's not what the plant sees. The plant uses gentle acids. So again, Rick's test is based on biomimicry, mimicking the root, the acids. Now, also Rick's test uses very sophisticated water analyzers. Again, water analyzers, not soil analyzers, water. Well, what does the soil run on? Water. So he uses gentle acids from the root and he uses water. Brilliant. What a brilliant scientist, letting nature come up with the chemistry to give us the correct test. Now, one thing I want to tell people right off the top of the bat, a lot of people want to get Rick's test and compare it to the old test. No, that's comparing apples and oranges. One test was not based on biomimicry. The other one was based on chemistry, caustic acids. It was based and calibrated on very destroyed soils. The old soil test and the Haney test are totally different. One's a biological test, the other one's a chemistry test. Total different tests. You use both of them, but don't compare them. They're apples and oranges. A lot of people get confused about that. The Haney test, I call it the blood sample of the soil. Where the soil runs on water. And like the reason I call it the blood sample, the human body, the reason doctors love using the blood sample, because it's passive and it tells you hormonal function, pH, it tells you everything about the human body. Well, the same thing with the Haney test. It uses the water in the soil and it picks up all those carbon molecules in the water. And so when he gets your soil test, he re-wets it and he picks up all those molecules and uses a very sophisticated piece of equipment. The old soil test can only pick up this forms of nitrogen and maybe ammonium. The Haney test can pick up all this. All these molecules now, all these carbon molecules and nitrogen molecules, and we can give you credit for all those amino acids and those other forms of nitrogen. The Haney test has the ability to do that. Again, every one of us has something in common in our soil, sand, silt, and clay. But what we don't have in common is right here. This is sand, silt, and clay, geology, but this is the biotic substances, the superglues created by fungi, bacteria, and living plants. This is dictated about how often you use cover crops, how often you do tillage, how you manage. This sets everybody apart, the management aspect. Geology plus life is soil, okay? Now, give you an example. Here's a young man who, Russell Hedrick, North Carolina, won the yield contest by using the Haney test. Did not grow up on the farm. He was a fireman and a diesel mechanic, and he started farming. In less than 5 years, this young man won the yield contest in 2016. 318 bushel corn. Yes, in North Carolina, where the soils are not even as good as Illinois, yet 318 bushel corn, and the county average is 112. Why did this young man do so well? No-till covers, excellent manager for nutrients, and using the Haney test. Another person that's done really well is Rick Clark, 7,000 acres of organic no-till. Organic no-till. Rick now has completely eliminated synthetic N, phosphorus, potash, lime, chemistry, any herbicides, fungicides, completely eliminated. He told me now, this was his first year of organic, completely transitioned to organic no-till. He's saving from 670 to 800,000 a year from not having to buy any of his inputs. The only thing he does now is roll and use cover crops. Dan Unruh in California, rolling his covers between his orchards, walnut orchards. Adam Chappell, growing irrigated furrow rice with 50 to 60% less seed, chemicals, water, again, biomimicry. Jack Stahl, farms in Canada. He, in 2018, his costs, fertilizer costs were $1.5 million. They dropped it to $127,000, and they purchased another 10,000 acres just by biomimicry, mimicking nature, using the cover crops. So it made a huge difference on how they understand the soil. Now, wrapping it up, I'm going to take you. I'm going to take you to Mexico. I just got back from. I went to Mexico a couple of years ago, and I'm going back in April. And I got to see some of the best grazers in the world, and they're doing biomimicry, and they're running their cattle like buffalo. And I'm going to show you what they've done by the concepts of biomimicry. I was born in 1961. I went to college at New Mexico State. This is a picture that I didn't realize that there was actual grass out there. This is what I grew up seeing when I went to college over there. That's what that's what it looks like now. It used to look like that in 61. Growing up in northern New Mexico, up in the tribes, being part of the tribes up there, this is a picture of Chaco Canyon. That used to be a forest. Look what happens when even the Native Americans there overextended themselves. 50 years of drought turned that whole area into a desert that used to be a pine forest. Now, let's take you to Mexico and see what ranchers in Mexico are doing. This is Alejandro Carrillo's. Notice his statement: we need to mimic what nature does, not fight nature. This is Jesus, Alejandro, Gabe, and myself. Look what these guys have taught me. I went to college right here, grew up here. The ranch that we're going to show you is right here. 600 cow calf. They only get 6 to 11 inches of rain. 4th generation rancher. You talk about hot, I mean hot. In the summer, you could throw an egg on the sidewalk and it would fry. That's how hot you're dealing with in the desert down there. This gives you a picture of the Damas Ranch. Just to give you perspective, that is a picture from Alejandro showing the Apache. Look at the grass that used to exist. It used to be grasses, used to be a prairie. This is what it is now. All that whole area going from all the way from northern New Mexico, all the way south, looks like this. California looks like this. Nevada looks like this. Parts of Colorado looks like this. Most of the West looks like this. It is not uncommon to see stuff of the land look like this. The way things were managed conventionally, this is the way it would take them 250 acres for one cow. This is the ranch next to Alejandro's, just before Alejandro's. This is how degraded it is. This is Alejandro's ranch. Moving the animals like buffalo. Went from 250 down to 20 acres to support one cow. This is Alejandro's father. He's 82 years old. That grass was not planted, ladies and gentlemen, was not planted. It came on its own. Who would have thought that a majority of the desert was a prairie? And I want to leave you with this last little video to show you some of the most beautiful things that are happening. I'm going to tell you, I have so much hope, so much joy about what is happening globally on soil health. Let me show you this little video created by the ranchers in Mexico.
Chihuahuan Desert, the largest desert of North America. Once lush grasslands supporting bison, antelope, sheep, golden eagle, and prairie dogs. Nowadays unproductive, eroded, lifeless land, There is no water outside. There is no life outside. There is no hope outside. But there is something going on right in the middle of the desert. He determined to bring the desert to a large scale. Yes, they are the heroes of yesterday. The vaqueros or cowboys, once legendary for taming the wild. Nowadays, is allies to get things back on track. They are working in sync with Mother Nature, moving cattle every day using fences and water bodies. Mimicking the migratory patterns of bison became its pattern. As cattle moves, they fertilize and work the soil, so life can come back once rain hits the ground. This transformation is already there, even if they are islands of grass across on the vast Chihuahua desert. We can replicate these successful experiences. We can fix the water cycle. We can cool this arid environment. We can create habitat for wildlife. We can keep people on the land. We are in. We are cool. We are ranchers willing to tackle desertification.
Wrapping it up, folks, I'm going to tell you, growing up in an arid environment, when I came back from Chihuahua, Mexico, I never had so much encouragement, so much hope. I know that we can heal our planet if we'd all work very hard together and learn and teach these basic concepts that the soil is alive, just as alive as we are, and teach our people to understand relationship and connecting young people back to the land, and teaching people about biomimicry. We have a saying: if you want to do some small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to do major changes, change the way you see things. What's happened with a majority of these ranchers or farmers, these regenerative producers, they all went through an epiphany. Like myself, we were losing the battle. We knew something was wrong. Now we understand what the goal is to emulate nature. Thank you so much.
Ray, thank you. We appreciate it. We do have some questions for you. I think you've got a bit of time for us, so maybe we can go through some of those. The first question that came in early on in your presentation was, can we take organic matter from our forest to incorporate onto our growing fields?
Is it for a purpose of inoculating? Is that what you're thinking?
It did not have, it was a question that came in and did not have any other context around it.
Well, some people, there's a Brian O'Hara, who is a vegetable grower he uses some of the forest floor and forest areas, and he'll grow some of his fungal spores, and he'll use that for his vegetables so that it suppresses weeds. So Brian O'Hara does that, and and it is a great way to make the soil much more fungal. So yes, you can use that as an inoculum.
Yeah, they wanted to know whether that was for improving organic matter, actually.
No, organic matter, in other words, best thing to improve organic matter is cover crops.
Right. So I did have a question about that, because as you presented it, it almost seemed as if you took those basic geological functions that make up the soil and that even if they were missing the organic matter, some of it, would be able to generate soil by using cover crops. Is that really what you meant to come across as?
No, what I meant is we have geology, sand, silt, and clay. Every farm, every part of the globe is geology. What builds organic matter is biology, living plants and microbes. They're the ones that make the organic matter. They're the ones that fuse and give the structure. They're the ones that do that. It's organisms and living plants. Without them, you would just have geology, period.
A question about trees and crops. Do they have the ability to take nitrogen out of the air?
What? Say that again.
Do trees and crops have the ability to take nitrogen out of the air?
As you can see, some are, legumes have the ability to take nitrogen out of the air. Legumes do that.
Right. Through their nodules, soybeans, for instance, by fixing nitrogen.
Right.
And there are a couple of other comments, and these are just comments. There are free living soil bacteria that can fix in too. That was just a simple comment that there are free living soil bacteria that can fix, and then nitrogen squared or nitrogen 2. So
that's right, Todd. Yeah, I really appreciate that comment. We're finding out now. Here's a good thing to bring out here now, Todd. A lot of the way I was taught as an agronomist, I said, well, where are the nutrients going to come from? Where's the nutrients coming from? Well, that's exactly a good comment from that person is we're finding out that there's organisms that fix their own nitrogen without the assistance of a plant. We know now through rhizophagy that plants actually can suck up bacteria like a little vacuum cleaner, and actually plants are carnivores. They eat the bacteria and use them for nutrients. We know that now. When I went to college, we only knew nitrate and ammonium. We're finding out now that nutrients are coming from many, many sources. So we're just beginning to scratch at the surface. So it's very, very exciting what we're finding out now.
Here's somebody who wants an opinion from you. Can strip tilling in 12-foot strips and 12-foot rows on highly erodible land or hell acres be rotated to eventually improve the whole field?
Well, one of the best things is what I was one of the opening speakers at a strip till conference, and I told them the best strip till machine to use is cover crops. Cover crops. They're the ones that bring the healing in. The strip till machine allows you to plant into that heavy residue and that. So what I would say is the best strip till machine is the living covers. They're the ones that change and modify. That's why I'm such a huge advocate. If I had one practice, Todd, one practice only, and they say, Ray, you only got one practice, what would you choose for the whole country? Cover crops. Just one, cover crops, because it would change everything. It would alter our climate. It would hold a lot more nutrients. It would stop flooding. We'd have less flooding. So it really comes back again to the living covers. They're the ones that really are going to change that soil for you.
Ray, thank you. We appreciate you being with us for the day, and excellent presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd.
Ray Archuleta, you can find him online if you want. Look for understandingag.com. Let me repeat that for you. His web address is understandingag.com. Now let's move on to a farmer from here in the state of Illinois. Third generation farmer. In fact, Ted Krauskopf is of Hickory Flat Cattle Company, and he's been transforming his 200-acre farm in the rolling hills of Madison County near Highland, Illinois. The highly erodible ground there inspired Ted to change his methods and begin practicing a more regenerative approach with a focus on grazing. He's here now to tell us how that happened. We appreciate you being with us, Ted. And do remember that if you've got questions for Ted as we move through our presentation, that you'll be able to get them answered. Ted and Monte Bottens will be answering questions after both of them have made their presentations. Good morning to you, Ted. If you can bring up your presentation, we would appreciate that, and we'll continue on with our program. And do recall that this one is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later if you'd like. And we'll give you some information as we close out our presentation today about the CEUs, I'm sure you're wondering about as well. Hey, good morning to you, Ted. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Todd. Good morning, everyone. Did the slide come up okay?
It did.
All right. I'm talking again today about the value of regenerative grazing, and I'm specifically talking about it with respect to me, because to me, it's the benefit is that it's beyond or more than just sustainable. This farm was badly run down, highly erodible slopes and light soils, hickory soils. They'd lost a lot of the topsoil. The soil organic matter was low, and so of course the erosion was a big problem. Rain didn't have a chance to soak in before it ran off. So the farm wasn't sustainable economically. I decided on pasture and grazing as a way to bring the farm back to profitability after seeing what happened on some CRP acres. A portion of the farm that was the most degraded had been enrolled in CRP and planted to a forage mix. I saw how the erosion on those acres was reduced right away. And when the contract ended, I built some fences and set up a small rotational grazing operation on part of those acres. Adding the cattle and controlling their grazing made the forages on those old CRP acres improve. Since I enjoyed working with the cattle, after a few years, I put in an EQIP application to convert 90 acres of mostly highly erodible cropland to rotational pasture. With the EQIP contract, there was cost share money for seeding pasture, for new fencing, including perimeter and division fences, water lines to the paddocks, a winter feeding station with access road, and a couple of stream crossings. Those improvements were completed in 2010, and that winter I had the cattle grazing stockpiled forage for the first time. The biggest single expense for my beef operation was feeding the cattle when they weren't grazing, and so I was anxious to try this practice. Stockpile forage is created by setting aside some pasture acres in the late summer to allow the forage to fully regrow during the fall. When the temperature drops below the 20s or into the 20s overnight, usually in early December, the pasture stops growing and becomes dormant for the winter. It's time to begin grazing the stockpile then. The most efficient way to graze the stockpile is by limiting the cattle to an area or a strip with enough forage dry matter to supply what they need and for a specific period of time. After reading about it, what other people were doing, I chose daily fence moves. Portable fencing equipment makes fence moves simple. And there are tools available to measure the forage so that you can calculate how much area the cattle need each day. With some trial and error at first, I was able to keep the cattle full and leave some residual to protect the soil. The cows caught on quickly and were always ready to move. I was surprised how fast the strip grazing changed their grazing habits. They became less selective, and the majority of their time was spent on the fresh strip each day. Controlling their grazing area also prevented them from doing as much damage to the pasture when the ground was soft, because they didn't walk around the whole paddock all day looking for the perfect bite. They stayed on that fresh area. This picture was taken, and I'm sorry I don't have any pictures from that first winter. It was before I had a good phone. But this picture was taken 2018 about 4 days before they finished that winter's stockpile. You can note the reels hanging on the fence there. That reel that's right next to that cow's head on the right side is a fence going across the paddock. And the next day I'll take that wire up and they'll go over to the one that you see 3 posts down. And I'll put that one back up further down for the following day. It's just a leapfrog. The first winter, seeing the benefits of the strip grazing, I decided to continue the practice through the whole grazing season. My goal in the winter had been to efficiently make use of those stockpiled acres, but why not make the best of the pasture the whole year? I needed to check on the herd anyway daily, and the time spent moving fence gave me the best chance to observe the cattle and how they were feeling as they moved into the fresh forage. Using the geared reels with polywire and the step-in posts made the fencing quick and easy. The time spent for me to take down a few hundred feet of this fence and let the cattle into a fresh strip and then put up the fence for the next day is about 20 to 25 minutes. I do almost all of it from the seat of a four-wheeler. Strip grazing is adaptive to other demands, whatever's going on in your life. If you need to be away for a day or two, you just give them a bigger area. My neighbor who checks on the cattle when we go to visit our kids just needs to make sure that their water's okay and look things over. So each season I could see the pasture and the soil conditions improving. Without tillage and with living roots in the soil year-round, the soil was gaining structure, more pore space for water and oxygen. There was less runoff from heavy rains, and when runoff did occur, now the water ran clear. Most everyone around this area remembers 2012. Peterson Brothers mentioned it, the drought and the heat. I was able to graze the cows straight through that summer into the fall without feeding hay. The grass was dry and brittle, but they had enough of it to maintain body condition. And that fall they bred back without any problems. In 2014, the Pasture Project began working in Illinois to encourage more pasture acres as a way to reduce pollution in sensitive watersheds and to promote pastured beef. Our farm became one of the demonstration sites. Their team visited and took baseline soil samples, conducted a forage plant inventory, and did other tests. Dr. Alan Williams was the lead farm and grazing consultant. After their first visit, I began to understand why soil health played such an important role in regenerative grazing. Regenerating soil health is the source of all the gains that follow. I needed to create the best working environment I could for the soil microbes, the microbiome, the underground livestock in the pasture that Ray's talking about. I had made a start with what I was doing, but there were changes I needed to make to improve the environment in the soil. I needed to reduce or limit the application of chemical fertilizer, pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides. They all serve a purpose, but they also carry side effects. And I was trying to build soil health, and so I needed to watch out for that. Pesticides are usually broad spectrum. Since there are many more beneficial species than harmful ones, they're killing a lot of the good guys. Some of those that they're killing could even be predators of the bug that I'm targeting with the pesticide. Herbicides kill what we call weeds. Dr. Williams calls them forbs, and many of those forbs are nutritious. They provide benefits to the diet of the grazing animal as well. Fertilizer is useful for increasing production for sure, but it hampers the soil microbe population from doing all it's capable of to help with production and to improve the nutrition of the plants in the pasture. The relationship between the plants and the soil microbes doesn't develop fully when the plant's being fed artificially. I still apply some N when I plant annual mixes, but not as much as I used to. around 35 units max on the annuals. I'm aware now of these side effects, so I'll avoid the unintended consequences of using those products when I can. This slide shows the cattle grazing some cover crop that overwintered from a mix from the previous summer. And there's a lot of weeds in there too, or forbs, and they're grazing it all. They pretty much eat what's in front of them. And they're not on this that many days. This is just a small paddock, but you can see their conditions not suffering while they're grazing this. There's nutrition in all these plants. The pasture project team came back in 2017 and 2019. Soil organic matter is increasing, so the soil is able to store more moisture when it rains, making the pasture more drought resistant. An additional 1% soil organic matter means 25,000 gallons more water holding capacity per acre. Brix tests on the pasture forages showed this higher levels of nutrients in the forages themselves than they found in 2014. The PLFA tests to measure the biology of all the total biomass, all the different kinds of microbes combined, have more than doubled since the baseline samples in 2014. 2014, I had about 2,000 nanograms per gram of biology in the soil sample, and 2019, I had 5,300 nanograms per gram. So I was pleased with that progress. This slide demonstrates what I'm trying to do grazing now with taking half and leaving half. The center of the photo shows the line where the fence I just took down, and on the left-hand side, it's been grazed. They'll graze a little more of that while they're in the paddock, but that's pretty much how it'll stay. They're going to walk back and forth to their water. You probably noticed the change in the cattle also. I switched in 2018, that season, to custom grazing, developing heifers for Andrews Stock Farm. So this is a group of younger animals, and I don't even have to own the cattle to do what I'm doing. The last year I applied chemical fertilizer to the perennial pasture was 2016. Forage production and the carrying capacity of the pasture has continued to increase. I give credit to regenerative grazing for the increase in production. An important part of the creating that ideal environment for the soil microbes or the underground livestock is grazing taller. It's all right if the forage gets to mid-maturity before grazing. Graze half the volume and leave half, followed by a good rest period where the forage can fully regrow before grazing again. More residual above ground keeps energy flowing to the plant root system. The leaves are the solar panels of the plants, and any sunbeam that doesn't contact a leaf is wasted. Some of that residual is trampled to the soil surface, and having that matter residue serves multiple purposes. It can help provide food for earthworms that are important for soil health. Other benefits of the residual forage include protecting the soil surface from direct sunlight so the soil stays cooler. Microbes work better when the soil stays cooler in summer. The soil also stays moist longer since a cooler temperature means less evaporation. Less evaporation leaves more of the soil moisture available for plant growth. That results in faster regrowth. You can see where this is going. It leads to more feed for the cattle. A significant percentage of the product of photosynthesis is sent below ground, as Ray talked about. It's exuded from the roots in the form of amino acids and simple sugars to help feed the underground livestock that colonize the rhizosphere, that root zone that's immediately soil contacting the roots. The rhizosphere is very important. The bacteria and fungi and other animals, organisms use that energy for life and convert minerals in the soil to organic form the plants can use. It's a circle of life, and I've oversimplified it a lot, but you get the point. It was a struggle at first to convince myself that the residual forage wasn't being wasted. I used to want them to clean up just a little bit more all the time. Another important part is the benefit to the pasture of what the cattle leave behind. Sometimes critics point out the terrible inefficiency of ruminants, but those nutrients passed back to the pasture are important for soil health as well, and for pasture production. Those organic nutrients are readily available. I got these numbers from Dr. Williams as far as what a 1,000-pound animal returns to the pasture every day. And you can do the math to determine what might be possible with your cattle herd. This group here was depositing about 13 pounds of N, 8.5 pounds of phos, and 29 pounds of K every day. They were also grazing about an acre a day, and so that's amount per acre. During my grazing season, they'll hit the same paddock about 3 to 4 times, and so you get an idea of what they're leaving for the pasture. I make every effort to have them leave those deposits on the pasture where they're grazing. Having water available in the paddocks makes that possible, and strip grazing makes for a lot more even distribution. Regenerative grazing has improved the whole ecology of the farm, not only the pasture, but there are more insects such as butterflies, dragonflies, fireflies, beetles, including dung beetles. There are more bird species like meadowlarks, killdeer, kingbirds, purple martins, and swallows. There are more game as well, including more deer. There's just more life of all kinds on the farm now. It feels like it's coming into balance. My goal is always to leave this much residual. That's another view of the paddock where those earlier pictures were. And I don't always succeed at that, but that's my goal all the time. So in conclusion, I just want to say that regenerative grazing, if you're thinking about it, it's not complicated or difficult. It comes down to take half for the cattle and leave half for the plants and soil, with time for the plants to recover before grazing again. And portable fencing equipment is quick and easy to use, and the time spent moving fence is the best time to watch the cattle. Many farms have some acres best suited for pasture, and regenerative grazing can be a way to profit from those acres and benefit the environment at the same time. If cover crops can be grazed in addition, then the benefits are multiplied over those acres too, as well as the environmental benefits. So thank you.
And thank you, Ted. We appreciate you being with us this morning. If you have questions for Ted Krauskopf, he's with the Hickory Flat Cattle Company, you can put them in the chat section and we'll get to them just in a moment. He's in Highland, Illinois. That's Madison County near St. Louis, about 200 miles to the north of him, and about the same amount of distance from the Mississippi River, frankly, as the crow flies. Monte Bottens farms in Cambridge near the Quad Cities, and he's actively pursuing all avenues to improve soil health, which includes bringing livestock back to the land on his 2,300-acre cropland operation. Monte, I'm glad you're here today. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you, Todd. Thank you, everyone, today. Really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about our experiences in a cropland type scenario. I've been to Ted's farm. It's pretty interesting to see what he's got going on there, and I've spent a lot of time with Ray, and it's great to hear his big picture thinking. But what I hope to do today is bring this a little bit more to application for you as an Illinois farmer, or as a specialist who are helping Illinois farmers. So I hope you'll enjoy this. If you have questions, please feel free to chime in here at the end, and we'll get your questions answered. So like Todd said, we're located in Northwest Illinois in Henry County, the self-proclaimed hog capital of the world. where used to be a lot of livestock on the land when I was a kid, and now most of the livestock is in barns or has migrated to other parts of the country. So we're kind of doing it a little different, but we're doing it the way we used to. So pretty excited to share what we've been up to. So I'm a 5th generation farmer. This hill right here has been in our family for 151 years. This is where we're grazing cover crops ahead of planting a soybean crop. And it's fun to see the impacts of what previous generations have done when they used to moldboard plow this hill that has B, C, and D slopes on it. And now today we've been long-term no-till and incorporating multi-species cover crops. And the final thing is the 5th element, as I like to call it, the 5th principle of integrating livestock. So we're working on that and seeing some very positive results, and want to share many things with you today that are working and some things to keep an eye on for the future. So the soil health principles, there's a quiz at the end of here. Everybody has to know those. First off is minimize disturbance. And this is both in tillage disturbance, which is very obvious, but also in input disturbance. So every time we add an input to the system, we are covering up for something that we haven't addressed within our cropping system. So we really did that move in 1996 when we went to no-till and also nutrient management with the planter and at the same time. Those are very, very critical, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We also at the same time worked at keeping the soil covered. So when you don't till the ground, you keep it covered. You protect it from wind and rain erosion, but also from UV erosion, which is very important when we talk biological concepts. Keep something growing at all time. When I lived in California, we didn't get going on cover crops as early as we should. But when I had an opportunity to move back home, we dove into that a little bit deeper. So we've been doing cover crops since 2016 on our farm, and really started growing alternative crops, both cover crops for grazing and wheat and small grains crops, to maximize the diversity within the cropland other than corn, beans, and more beans. And then we took the leap into soil health principle number 5, integrated livestock, in 2017 with 18 steers. And now today we have roughly 184,000 pounds of grazing ruminants, along with lamb, chicken, pork, and eggs. So one of the things I'd like to, for those of you that like algebra, this line here will really bother you, where I've got number 5 equals 2x of 1 through 4. I really am beginning to see that everything we've done with no-till, everything we've done with cover crops, everything we've done to keep the land covered and to maximize the diversity will get us 1x result, really measured in soil organic carbon. But when we go to integrating livestock, that's when we have the opportunity to nearly double the effect of 1 through 4. So stay tuned, more to come, but really that's what we're seeing right now. And when you have to look at these things, it's over a long-term basis to see how we are actually improving. So just to give you an idea of what this actually means in Illinois, I want to share with you a little video that I took in 2019, which was the year it seemed like it would never stop raining.
So sometimes people say you can't be prepared for weather extremes. Here's our field right here with cover crops, long-term no-till. Then we're just gonna pan across the street right here. Village and no cover crops. Look at the standing water. I'll just drive along here a little bit, and this is the same slope, same soil type, side by side. But good air water management makes a big difference on erosion control.
Yes, it does make a big difference on erosion control. So not only are we losing that water that you can need later in the season to support and grow a crop, but we're taking a lot of nutrients with it, and we're really polluting our water systems. So we don't really want to be a long-term polluter. We want to be a long-term steward of our soil. So pretty interesting. So today on our farm, we do a lot of experimental work, because what we do in coaching other farmers around the country, our farm is really kind of our very large scale research and sandbox. But we are doing variable rate seeding by Varus and population control, nutrient control. If you look here in this top screen, this is an example where we tried to do double crop beans, otherwise known as greedy beans. We're pretty far north for that, but we knew some areas need regenerated. So some areas were double crop beans after wheat. Other areas were cover crop after that wheat in order to help regenerate the soil and grazed. So we're looking at the concept of we really don't need to drive in straight rows when we're dealing with small seeded crops. We do extreme seeding. This is no-till corn into very high biomasses. And that has to have everything right with the nutrients to make that work. We've done 60-inch rows, and we're looking at the intercropping of soybeans into wheat that you harvest for grain. And we've also done intercropping within corn at V3 to V5. With some of these things we've had limited success on, but we've learned a lot of what doesn't work, okay? Which is just as valuable as what does work. So I want to share with you some of the things that we've learned that do work and could be adopted on a very broad scale with the help of a coach that can help you point out weaknesses within your system in order to make it work well. But I want to go through those here today so you got something to take home and put in the playbook for this year. This was step one that we did, and really it's nutrient management in order to enable cover crops and enable no-till. While the technology that's here today is amazing compared to what we started with 24 years ago. Today, our planter is able to variable rate apply row by row, not only seed, but 3 separate blends of fertilizers in 5 different locations, so that we are staging it to be optimum for when the plant needs it, when the nodal roots are expressed, and those kind of things. This is our total nutrient diet. We are not a starvation diet. We are not a completely free, but this is our entire diet for an entire year, which you'll notice is significantly reduced over what the tri-state recommendation would be. And I think we need to look at the fact of when we're removing grains from a field, Dr. Dwayne Beck and several others would also say we have to replace the nutrients that we are removing. But in what we're doing here is we're mineralizing from parent material some of the nutrients, and we're supplying other nutrients at key times that just can't be mineralized in time for our current crop production systems. Now, if we were a grassland, or if we were a prairie, or if we were a forest, we would have diversity and multiple layers and those kind of things where we wouldn't need those applied nutrients. But today I have to sell corn and beans, and in our current system, that requires inputs because we are exporting so much from our land. One other key note that I think is a great soil health tip is first application of any nutrient is with the planter in the spring. Especially at 2019 been thrown at us, many people probably would have had a tough decision to make between planting beans late or planting corn late because all the nitrogen was already out there anyway. So it really de-risks your system. Plus, we get a lot of biological tie-up of nitrogen and other nutrients when we're dealing with heavy cover crop residues that tie up during their breakdown process. So that's really important to consider. So this here has allowed us to do many, many things, whether you're in conventional tillage, no tillage, cover crops. When you go to this kind of system that, quote, slows you down when you're planting, the good news is it slows you down at harvest too and makes it much more consistent to get a return. Another thing I can recommend for growers in Illinois is high diversity, HD, 4K cover crops, HD cover crops, always planting a mix, especially if you're south of Interstate 80 or maybe in Illinois 17 range. We're in that area where we struggle to get a lot of diversity growth because of the northern climate. But as you move south in the state, lots and lots of opportunities to get a high diversity mix out there in order to improve the diversity of the soil microbiome, but also improve the ability of the soil to regenerate over time. And here's the things I really see that are key benefits out of cover crops. One is weed suppression. I say plant the weeds you want. Otherwise, nature will send you the weeds that you don't want. I would much rather have rye or wheat, triticale, Austrian pea, and vetch to kill than mare's tail, water hemp, giant ragweed, and all the other nasties that we have in Illinois these days. So that's the number one benefit, in my opinion, of cover crops. Plus erosion. That's obvious. That's why we started it. We farm mainly HEL ground, and we wanted to have the erosion control benefits associated with cover crops. And then water infiltration, like I showed you on that video early on, it makes a big difference when we can connect the surface and get through that surface sealing layer and get it down into the bulk soil profile. So a huge benefit to cover crops. Plus, I like the fact that it allows us to feed the earthworms when they run out of residues on the soil in August. They've got more residue to keep them going. Another big tip I think that you could be doing is plant your soybeans green. This is real simple. Most people have technology in their soybean traits that allow them to burn down the cover crops, but we plant green and spray with non-GMO beans and have great luck. Really helps with suppressing weeds and gives you really another mode of action to look at. A couple tips: forget your residue managers, take them off, put them in the shop. Don't attempt to use them, because as soon as you do, we learned really early on, you make one round and then you spend half of a day taking them off and unplugging the wheels. Watch your closing wheels too. If you have really spiky type closing wheels, they're really great at breaking up everything. Rubber V's is what we found seem to work the best. And also, when you deal with tall cover crops, this is a moderate sized cover crop. We've had it up to the above the bar in planting. Be sure to roll. We found that's worth 7 bushel the acre by allowing the sunlight to not interfere, especially in very high height and density situations. Here's some things that look promising in the future, but can't recommend it yet because it requires some extra level of skill. And we're really looking into this, and it's a small grain soybean intercrop. We really want to turn that cover crop into a cash crop. We've been using no herbicides. First off, you can't, so because what's registered on wheat isn't registered on beans and vice versa. But it really gives us an opportunity to increase soil carbon because we have a high carbon grain crop and a low carbon nitrogen or high nitrogen bean crop. Those two are going together to really help us create stable organic matter. Right now, it's a work in process. When we're selling it as non-GMO, if we have any wheat that we didn't happen to harvest as we were harvesting and it gets into non-GMO soybeans, those are for food grade, so that's a gluten issue, and so they'll get rejected. So seed separation is a big issue, and harvest timing it right to where the beans aren't too tall, the wheat's ready. We're looking at rye also, seeing some yield advantages to that. And Ryan and I at our farm are kind of going back and forth. I'd really like to harvest them all once and separate the seeds after harvest, but stay tuned, more to come on that. And then finally, the fifth element, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about this. This is our cow herd now, grazing cover crops. You can see how we have the skip strip cover crop to where we, in the distance there, where we seed our plants into on 30-inch centers. We have two groups of cattle here. We have some finishers up front and the cow herd in the back. We're grazing that on April 7 to 10 ranges when we go, and then we just delay planting until 1st of June in order to get those benefits. And we thought it was good to tell the story. So here's some of our cattle in a cover crop after wheat, where we're grazing those summer forages that just put on some massive quantity. And we found that it makes a really great product. And people are looking for cover crop ribeyes, as you say, and we can get great marbling and provide a product to families. And we started Grateful Graze as a way to online market and direct market, diversify our farm and connect with the community. So from FFA to our customers and doctors, we've had people connect with us that we just never have before, and we can continue to tell the soil health story. Want to think a little bit about the future and what changing crops could take a look at and possible negative effects on soil health. Dr. Dwayne Beck, a long-term systems researcher from Dakota Lakes Research Farm up in Pierre, South Dakota, he highly recommends 75% high carbon crops. So that'd be a corn, 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 bean type rotation, or a corn, corn, wheat, bean. So that's the way to really get soil improvement. But if you look at our consumer for corn is changing, and it's going to be changing over the next 10 years. For example, Europe just registered more electric vehicles in September than gasoline vehicles. And that's a little tough on ethanol. Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger, I'm guessing these are huge trends. There's lots of money behind it, and people are vegan interested, vegetarian interested, think it's healthier for them. That remains to be seen. But I'm guessing there'll be 20% share of market in the next 10 years. And lab meat's coming out real quick, and that's gonna really change things too. Could be up to 20% share in 10 years. Grass-fed is growing too at 20% per year, is current growth rate, and 85% of it's currently imported. There's a real opportunity there locally. But I think we're going to see a shift of, instead of feeding forages and grains to animals to get our protein in the human diet, we're going to be growing that protein out in the field. And if you look at where corn goes today, I think these are the risk areas in the next 10 years. There could be a significant decline in ethanol use, milk consumption, beef from the fake meats and the lab meats and those kind of things. But up to 25% of the corn crop, in my opinion, is at risk in the next 10 years. And up to 50% of conventional beef, if we look at some of these trends that are going on right now. So what that does is it shifts us away from growing a beautiful high carbon crop that's adding to soil health to more beans and peas and leguminous crops that can really eat carbon out of the soil. So cover crops are going to become even more and more important in the future. So when you're thinking about your farm and where you want to go, I took this picture when I received in my, I bought the British White herd from Gabe Brown up in North Dakota to get my cow herd started. And in the background is our grain setup. And really, I call that the old paradigm of agriculture, harvesting grain, sending it to an ethanol plant to China or Japan. In the foreground is the new ag paradigm, where we're integrating animals, creating the protein in the field that way. And really, the only difference between the old paradigm and the new paradigm is up to you. You have to do it. And I encourage you to take a look at that. I can answer any questions with you, coach you, show you other videos on how we're doing things. I'd be happy to. In addition to our farm, have some agribusinesses where we work with customers all over the country, and also check out what we're doing in the direct marketing approach and see if that might be an opportunity for you. I appreciate everyone's time. Todd, back to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Monte. Really good presentations. We do have some questions for both you and Ted, and I think, Ted, we'll start with you if you want to turn your video and your unmute yourself. Someone wants to know if there's been much of a change in the weed species that you see in your pastures.
There's been a change. The better job I do managing the forages that I want, the less weeds I have. And I've found also that some of these weeds seem to have their own cycle where I haven't taken any action to spray because I didn't want the side effects. The weeds have diminished on their own, and I ended up with the forages I wanted. So I've been really pleased with how it's worked.
There was another question. They want to know what your water supply is and if you have a need to control flies during the summer months.
My water supply now is actually rural water. We're in a neighborhood where well waters, there is well water, but not enough for this many cattle. And so we're on rural water. And so the cattle I have a water bill for the pasture each month. It's not prohibitive, and it's kind of a good thing. If I had a good well, I'd prefer to do that. I don't want to water in the ponds. There's 2 ponds on the pasture, but I want those cattle drinking clean water. And I think there's been a benefit to less, say, small infections and things that the cattle had to deal with because they're drinking clean water. So I do have that. And what was the second part?
Do you need to control flies in the summer months?
I haven't used any sprays particularly. The owners of the cattle do some pour on when they come in to work the cattle for artificial insemination and for preg check and so forth. And that has some residual effect for the flies for a few days too. And then the other thing that I do is if the fly pressure is too severe, I have put insecticide tags in the lids of my mineral feeders, so the cattle brush through that when they go in to get mineral and get some protection that way. But really, the flies haven't been as bad as they were before I started this type of grazing. The cattle are always moving to fresh area every few days, and I don't think the flies find them all the time.
This question is not related to the conservation side, or maybe it is. Mostly it's related to the management and you not owning the cattle. Are there any obvious liability questions when you graze someone else's cattle?
I have a really good relationship with Andrus's, and basically I'm responsible for water and grass. They provide anything else the cattle need, and if there's a problem health-wise, they're there to help with it. So I don't feel like I have any extra liability in that respect. And I think that arrangement would be individual. It depends on what you can get with whoever your customer is.
This question is related to the first one that we talked about as it relates to some species shift in weeds, but they want to know on that, and then if you used a certain overseeding mixture to begin with, and if you've changed that over time.
As far as the weed species, there hasn't been much of a shift. Like I said, I can control by leaving that high residual on the grass forages. It really suppresses the weeds, and there's not a problem except in areas where there's high concentrations around the watering areas. There's small areas that come up in weeds, and I've actually tested lamb's quarters for bricks, and it's good feed. So I let them clean that off. At the end of the season, I'll sow some, just broadcast some cereal rye in those areas because I don't want bare ground over the winter. But that hasn't been a problem.
Monte, a good place to transition to you as it relates to the cover crops. Someone would like to know about escapes of the cover crops. For instance, they suggest crown vetch is pretty good at invading natural areas and roadsides.
Todd, can you hear me okay? I had a little bit
Yes.
of garble on my end when I was listening to you guys. As far as escapes with the cover crops, it's like a good chemical program where you're trying to stack multiple modes of action. You know, if you want to talk about that as part of a regular residual or post program, adds another layer of diversity. Now, if we just did cover crops forever, guess what will happen? We'll have escapes. That's just how nature works. It adapts and shifts to our management. But I think, you know, when you're looking at what we're trying to do is look at scenarios. If you're talking about the more advanced work, we're trying to look at scenarios to where we can affordably transition to organic on acres. That's one of the positives associated with the co-cropping. Hope that answered their question.
A quick question on VRT that you're using. I'm wondering how economical that actually is, because the equipment would seem to have been pretty expensive, especially with the VRT technology on it.
Sure. So it depends on what you want to look at. One of the things that we gained by going to the VRT technology is we are also able to eliminate expensive controlled pumps. We're able to eliminate red balls and spaghetti tubing all over our planter. We are also able to eliminate check valves and actually had something that worked. We have a far better control on those kind of things, especially on turns and those things. So there was a lot of other cost offsets associated with going to, it's basically V-Apply HD from Precision Planting. It's one of those things when you go to write the check, your stomach hurts. And then after you run it for one season, you wonder why you hadn't done it sooner. So it all depends on your current crop mix and what you want to accomplish and where you're at equipment wise. We'd switched to a new planter and we just started straight off with V-Apply HD and absolutely love it.
Well, Monte and Ted, thank you so much for joining us today. We do appreciate that. Our thanks go to Ray and to Ivan as well, and the Peterson brothers who dropped by with their video. And I want to remind you that we have some sponsors that we'd like to thank as well for the day. They include Illinois Extension, the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant, Pro Harvest Seeds, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, and as well as many others, including the Stewardship Alliance, along with the Illinois Sustainable Agriculture Society, the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, USDA, NRCS, and of course, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. We thank you very much for joining us today. And special thanks to all the folks in the background that helped to put this together, especially Ileana Brown from University of Illinois Extension. Be sure to visit my website too. I may as well take time for that. I'm a farm broadcaster here at the University of Illinois, willag.org. I talk about agriculture and the markets every day of the year. That's the business day of the year, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but you can find it as a podcast if you'd like. Everything's there at willag.org. Thank you for being with us. I'm U of I Extension's Todd Gleason.